Okay, so I was asked just to comment a little bit on the two dots before the start of the next sugya, just on the final words there of the Amar Zera Amarav Shiurei Presomios Osulatalton Shabbos. I didn't actually have much to say on it, but I just shared one rishon which I found fascinating, which is the Rashba. So basically, Rabbi Zobin says that these leftover items of clothing are Muktza, and Abai explains that's because they are less than Gimel al Gimel, and therefore not suitable for anything, can't be used for anything. The Rashba, for those who saw inside, says that the simplest explanation is because the point that Rabbi Zobin is making is since they're so small, they're not roy for anyone, and therefore you have Stoma, Odom, Zork, and Ashba. So basically, we have a sequence in the Gemara of different scenarios. We have some things which, even if you throw away, don't become Muktza because they're self-evidently useful. That's one extreme. You have other things which, if you throw away, are Muktza, but if you don't throw away, are not Muktza. And then finally, you have things which, even if you haven't thrown away, are Muktza because they're just clearly garbage, no matter what. And that's the Chiddush of Rabbi that a shmata that's so small, it's less than Gimel or Gimel, is so clearly useless that it's omeid lizorik. That's the Rashba's pshat. He then brings from a Ravid, who has a completely different pshat, who says that we're talking about a Talus Shel Mitzvah. Now Rashi brings in Talus Shel Mitzvah, but merely to translate the word, not because that's what he's that's not because that's what Rashi thinks the sugya is talking about. But the Ravid seems to understand that we're talking about Talus Shel Mitzvah, and therefore it's not chazi lemichva beitunufa. It's not, you can't use a Talus Shel Mitzvah to cover dirt with. A Talus Shel Mitzvah is doesn't have kedusha. In Halacha there's chefza of kedusha, which has sanctity, which basically means something that's associated with the Shem Hashem. So either a Sefer Torah or mezuzah or tefillin themselves, or something that serves that, so an Oren HaKodesh and things like that. A mitzvah article does not have kedusha, but nonetheless, there's halachas not to be mevaz a mitzvah. So you shouldn't use a mitzvah, you shouldn't disdain a mitzvah, scorn a mitzvah, mistreat a mitzvah artifact. And the Talus Shel Mitzvah, the Ravid says, has shouldn't be used for something lowly or unclean, and therefore you wouldn't be able to use it for michvah beitunufa, and therefore he says it's Muktza. But for less than that, why should a little shmata not be worthwhile? I mean, nowadays where we live in a world of far more plenty, we use shmatas still. We use them as rags and things like that. So why should the shmata not be a useful? Why should in a world where they had less plenty than we had, where every scrap was used for whatever it could be used, the Rav is arguing why should it be just because it's less than Gimel Gimel? Why should it be thrown away? It can still be used for something useful. Sorry. Yes. But maybe you would use it as an article of clothing, or a non-bizayon use. Maybe you could find a non-bizayon use, and less than Gimel Gimel, all that has is a bizayon use. Whereas it's given that's an article of kedusha, if you can find it as a. So, for example, one of the things they recommend using sefer for is a bookmark. So you can use it for something else. You can use it for a mechubed use. But since it's a Talus Shel Mitzvah, it can't be used for a lowly use, and that's why it's Muktza. That's what the Rabbi says. Yeah.
The fact that we say that the Gimel by Gimel is a kind of status of Chavruta or not give us how we see its functionality. Because less than Gimel Gimel, it's not Chavruta because we don't see it to be big enough for use. So how could the Rashba say, well, it's
Ravid, yeah.
Ravid say we would use it.
All the Ravid is saying is that you can't argue that by default it's only Dizrika, because there can be uses that you can squeeze out of it. That's his point. That's the
use. If it has use, then why do we set the limit?
Because there may be a difference between, in a way, we'll sort of explore this a little bit later again, but there may be a difference between what's considered omeid for use with respect to Tumah and the fact that it still has enough of a lingering use with respect to Shabbos. Don't forget over here, no one is saying it's achieved Kelim status because l'chatchila it's omeid for that use. All we're saying is that if it was a Keli, as per a Mishna, it still has Me'ed Melacha, it still has a use, and therefore the Hachana remains. The Hachana is not removed. So Lav Dafka, the criteria are identical. That's the Svara of the Rivers. I don't really know what the machlokes between the Rivers and the other Rishonim is. The Rivers says the Svara. All the other Rishonim assume you'll chuck it out. The Rivers says, no, you could use it to L'chatzis Batanuf. It's interesting. I don't really know. Yeah.
So how follow the free on free changes between the Ashir and the Ani? So it would be free on free it's both for the poor person and free on free tvachim maybe for the.
That's right. Yeah, for the.
It does
Yeah, that's part. Yeah, fingers not tvachim. Yeah. Okay, so yes, I'm putting a little bit on hold. Yeah, so I'm putting a little bit on hold the Ashir and Oni discussion, because we'll get to it late. It's really a moment and a half's time that we'll get to it. So I've sort of been ignoring it, even though the Rishonim do bring it in. Basically, sort of what's floating a little bit behind the scenes, since you mentioned it, is the concept that different people have different levels of use. We already saw that at the beginning of the sugya, in which it's possible you chuck something out and it's not mukta. Well, if I've chucked it out, why is it not mukta? I've declared it useless. And the answer is, well, because botla data, because it's fundamentally useful. So part of what's going on beneath the surface over here is that an oni and an osher, that different people have different uses. But I'm putting it on hold till we see the later sugya. Either way, the Ravid says there's enough of a use lingering of chasi that you can use it to cover tenufa, the chaburah tenufa, that is not mukta, because it at least has some very weak type of use. And the other Rishonim assume that it's so useless that it's omed zrika, and therefore it achieves muktzah status. Okay, that's just tidying up the last sukkah since the last two sort of just finish that off. Let's move on to the two dots, which is Tanur, Shivrei, Tanur, Yashan. So first of all, just the maths of the sugya. Shivrei, Tanur, Yashan, harehin kol hakelim and intalim b'chatzah. So a broken Tanur, which is old, if it breaks, it's kachol hachenim and talim b'chatzah. So basically, what this brisa is saying is, it's sending us back to the Mishna. The Mishna says that all kelim that are broken are, as long as they're oisim me'ed melacha, as long as they have some functionality, they don't become mukta. Says the brisa, Shivrei, Tanur, Yashan is the same. That's the simplest reading of the brisa. That Shivrei, Tanur, Yashan also have a use, and therefore they're not mukta. Why Yashan? So the Rishonim explain, because it's hardened, it's baked in a kiln, and therefore it's useful. It seems that even though, let's say, a pot or something like that, they would bake in a kiln in order to harden it, with an oven, they didn't bother baking in a kiln, or didn't bake it much, because it was going to self-kiln itself, it was going to self-bake itself, and therefore, when it's chadash, it's basically unkilned or insufficiently, what's the word for when you, fired, thank you, insufficiently fired, and therefore it's useless. It's just crumbling clay. But once you use it for the first time, then it fires itself, and therefore now it becomes useful. That's the pshat in the sugya.
I mean that's the point where it becomes the kli or not the kli?
It's interesting you're asking that. It's not so much the lomdus that pre that point it's not a kli, because it is already created by humans into a slave, into a functional item. The point is that if it breaks, it would be useless, because it would be unfired clay, and therefore it would just be crumbly. So if your oven is unbroken, again, we're going to get to this discussion later because of the halachas of tumah, and because of this is maybe a poorly made oven and various other factors floating around. But in principle, a well-made oven, where not that it was mechubar karka and other things, would be a kli, because it's there to be used. You still need to use it to make it optimal, but it's already a kli. It wouldn't be mukta. The problem would be that that if it breaks, then the crumbling clay is useless, and therefore it would be mukta. Right, but we're not talking about using it on Shabbos to burn it.
Still in the process of really being made.
No, it could well be that the firing is a makub patish, but it doesn't mean that pre the firing it's mukta.
But then it's not a finished product.
True, but who says an unfinished product is a mukta when it's the very process of finishing it is the use of it. So if you ask yourself, is it a useless kli, or can it be used for what it's designed for? The answer is it can be used for what it's designed for, because you can put something in there and bake it. It's just that very baking will also finish it off.
But if it's a key that's in the process, and in order to finish the process can't be done on Shabbos, firing, does that not affect the status of it be used in its unfinished state?
No, there's another question over here, which is on Shabbos you can't use it at all because it's an oven. So it might be mukta a kli melachot le'issa, but it doesn't mean it's not a kli. It's a kli that you can't use on Shabbos because you can't bake on Shabbos, but it doesn't mean it's not a kli. It doesn't mean it's again a Muktza machmas gufay is something that's completely useless. Stones and twigs. It's not stones and twigs. It's an artifact that you've set aside for human slavery, for human servitude, to be used by humans. We've made it into a keli. It's just not, you will use it. The next thing you will do with it, will use it. There's nothing further you need to do. In the process of using it, it will also finish it off. So if you used it on Shabbos, it could be, you'll be over two melachos, the melacha of whatever you're baking, and the melacha of makri papatish. Okay, interesting. But that doesn't make it not a keli. So l'chor, it would be kli shemach to so that would be its halachic status.
Sorry for missing it, but if it breaks, why can't you use it then?
Only because technical answer, not a lomdish answer, technical answer. Because since it's unfired, the clay isn't hard, it will crumble, and therefore be useless. It will crumble. It will crumble, exactly right. No, because it's crumbly, it's too crumbly, it's unfired clay. So it's just mud, yeah, it's crumbly, it's unfired clay. Yeah. That's something that just before we learn the sugya, we need to get the facts of what we're saying. We don't always succeed in understanding the facts of the Gemara, which is a problem in the sugya. The Gemara is sometimes describing sort of mechanisms that we don't sort of production techniques and kelim that we struggle to understand. But here we do understand the thing. Rashi is explaining to us, so it crumbles. It's just clay, so it just crumbles to dust. It's not. It will always crumble. It's too. Okay, so that's Mashat in the sugya. That it's unfired clay. Yes, Max.
No, sorry, I didn't say
that. Fine. Okay, so I'll mute you. No problem. Okay, now actually, let me take your point just to go a little bit further. The Tanur b'pashtus is kli shemalachta le'isa. That's the simplest understanding of the status of the Tanur. Let me just say why I'm giving some hesitancy around it. A Tanur is really an oven, is really a cupboard which we put things into and then bake with. So it's not 100% clear that a Tanur is kli shemalachta le'isa. There is somewhat of a machlokes shown about this. Let's talk about something else, which is a pot. So what is the status of a saucepan? Is it kli shemalachta le'isa or not? Well, it's not so simple because it's used for cooking in. So you would say it's a classic kli shemalachta le'isa. But then when you finish cooking in it, you often leave the things inside it and put it in the fridge, and then maybe you'll take it and serve. If you boil rice or pasta, you may leave the rice and the pasta in the pot and put it in the fridge. And then tomorrow, when you serve at your table, your Shabbos table, you'll empty the rice out and put it into a nicer pot. Or maybe even just bring the pot to the table if you've got a nice pot. So you have things which are kelim which are melachot le'isa or leheta. That's one scenario. Or things which are kelim shemalachta le'isa, but you can still squeeze a kli shemalachta le'heta out, a heta use out of it. So it's very hard to give a general rule because there's a spectrum of possible usefulnesses. A Tanur b'pashtus is kli shemalachta le'isa because you don't really use it as a cupboard, but sort of essential to the use of a Tanur is to put things inside it, and then it's a convenient place to heat things inside. So there are minority views that argue that a Tanur crosses the threshold into kli shemalachta le'isa or leheta, which effectively therefore functions as kli shemalachta le'heta. I don't know if these Rashi brings it in Bates and so on. I'm not sure that these views have any impact on Halacha and Maisa. But anyway, I just mentioned that for general knowledge. That Tanur b'pashtus, the simplest understanding is that an oven is kli shemalachta le'isa. In which case, but it's a kli nonetheless. Kli shemalachta le'isa. In common parlance, we think of it as being Muktza. But in the lomdas of Muktza, really kli shemalachta le'isa is not Muktza in the sense that you can't use it for stam, you can't move it mecham l'tel, but you can move it l'tzorech gufay. So that's the second pshat point I wanted to make in the sugya. But there's a third pshat point I want to make. Rafi, yeah.
The oven is attached to the ground. Maybe you could consider it like gufta.
Yeah.
You can't attach things from the ground.
Yeah. So that's an excellent question. We will get to that point, but it's clear that in our Gemara we're not assuming it's Muktza machmas gufay, because if it was, there'd be nothing to talk about Shivrei Tanur. The whole lomdas of the Gemara is that you have the whole brisa, but not the Gemara. The brisa says that Shivrei Tanur are like Shivrei Kelim that we learned in our Mishna, and therefore they're not Muktza. So clearly, the parent figure is somewhat not Muktza. Whether it means it's not Muktza at all, it's kli shemalachta le'heta or kli shemalachta le'isa, we don't know. Probably kli shemalachta le'isa, but therefore its offspring, the broken shards, isn't Muktza. Clearly not Muktza machmas gufay. Why is it not Muktza machmas gufay? Well, somewhat depends on the continuation of the Gemara and the comparison to Tumah and Mechubel Karka and so on. Maybe a keli can be attached to the ground. So he says not. We'll have to analyze all of that. If you can only use it when it's detached, then you are correct. You would have the problems of melachas boino or seisa over and so on. Okay, so that's the second point. The third point, though, to mention is what is the status of this broken shard? Is it again, the core message of the brisa is that you have another example. Sorry, Josh, you've got your virtual hand raised. Apologies.
Yeah, would you be able to just explain how a tunnel works as it's conceived here? As in, because you were just saying you put the food inside, but I sort of understood that you put the fuel inside and put the food on top. What was
Okay,
it
sorry,
actually?
I spoke inaccurately because I shifted in talking about an oven. It's a fair point. You do put the food on top, but there's a sort of a little dip in it in which the food goes. But I should have spoken more accurately. I was shifting to the metaphor of a modern oven being a cupboard. You're right, but somewhere where you place objects, and therefore it's a table. The better analogy I should have said is it's a table where you place things, and then you use that for heating. In a modern oven, I was saying it's a cupboard in which you place things, but I spoke poorly. You're correct, but you do heat things in it rather than on it, in the sense that it sits within the sort of indentation on the top. We'll come to that later. Actually, though we're far off that. Right at the end of the Gemara, the Gemara has a discussion about Osa Maisa Tipka. I'm not trying to pronounce that word, which is you have a flat shard which you can still use to cook on, but you don't cook in it, you cook on top of it. And the question is whether that's still considered a melachot or not. So you do cook in an oven, that's still true to say, but you're right, not in a cupboard. And my analogy of a cupboard was wrong.
So just what I understand, in the standard case, it's a pot with a lid on top, right, which might have a dent in it where you would actually put the food, but then you put the fuel in the pot itself and like that.
Yeah, and it may not even be
case,
maybe more of a tube is a better way even to think of it. Yeah.
A tube where the hole is on the floor.
Yes, yeah. We'll look. Let me put you on hold because we'll learn Rashi in a few moments just to understand the tzio of the misfunctioning oven. Yeah.
Isn't the standard case more like
Thank you.
oven or you used to cook where you've got effectively like a dome shaped inside, so you put the bread inside.
Okay, let me put the tzios on hold and we'll look at Rashi. We'll work our way through Rashi shortly. Yeah. Okay. So that's the so again. So just to summarize, we're talking about a Tanur. The Tanur is bepashtus klisha melachot la'isa. Now we have a question: what is the status of the Shivrei Tanur? Now, the simplest answer to the question would be the whole lomdus of being a broken thing off a keli is the chiddush of the Mishna that as long as it still has some functionality, it remains non-Muktza. It continues with the non-Muktza status of the parent. And therefore, it sounds paradoxical to suggest that the offspring is less Muktza than the parent. So the simplest understanding of this statement would be that the Tanur is klisha melachot l'isa, and the offspring doesn't become more Muktza by being broken since it still has a functionality. And therefore, the offspring is klisha melachot l'isa. That's the simplest understanding that we would think is the pshat in the brisa. Again, the Tanur is klisha melachot l'isa. That's even though in colloquial talk we call that Muktza, it means it's muchan. It is muchan. It's not muchan for moving mechama l'tel, but it's muchan l'sorech gufay. The chiddush of the Mishnah on the Amud Aliyah and the chiddush of this brisa over here is that when something breaks, it maintains its hachana status as long as it has some functionality. Okay, what does that mean? It maintains its hachana status. Surely it means it maintains its current status, i.e., the shard would be klisha melachot l'isa. However, the language of the brisa doesn't sound like that. The language of the brisa seems to say that it's not Muktza at all. Tanur Rabbanan, Shivrei Tanur Yashan, Harihin kachol hakelim anatolim. They're like any keli that can be taken. So what does it mean kachol hakelim anatolim? Does it mean klisha melachot l'isa or not Muktza at all? Sounds like it means it's not Muktza at all. Okay, maybe you could argue no. Even Muktza machmas klisha melachot l'isa is called nittel. We've seen earlier that the Gemara is happy to use an language of nitolin, something can be taken when all it means is a sorech gufay. Doesn't sound like that in brisa, but it's not. I can't prove it to you, but I can prove to you the view of the Rambam. Let's look at the Rambam in source 2, Hilchos Shabbos Perek Vav Halacha Vav, where he brings this. Shiur Machtzelos, he's masat himself in the order of our Gemara. By the way, the Rambam, even though he structures his Mishnah Torah conceptually and doesn't follow the order of the Gemara, in fact, he writes in his Hakdama to Mishnah Torah that I set out to, Gemaras are scattered all over the place because they're organic, free-flow conversation, and you can have Halacha and Muktza here, and then Halacha there, and in another Masechta. I'm trying to give you something which is Masuda, chapter conceptually. And that's why we can be more medaic sometimes in the Rambam than you can in the Gemara about sequence of halachas. Nonetheless, where possible, the Rambam likes cutting and pasting as much as possible from the Gemara. So he'll often still try and follow the sequence of the Gemara where there's no particular reason to change. He also likes using the examples of the Gemara. So even though the Rambam is trying to draw out sort of broader principles, nonetheless he likes using the examples of the Gemara in what he explains. So here we have a classic example. Shiur Machtaloi Shabbat, that's a previous sugya. That's what we just learned. Shivrei Tanur, now the crucial point. Muktza the Taltalon. Does everyone have a sheet here? I did print something for them there. Shivrei Tanur, Muktza the Taltalon. So Shivrei Tanur is a kli shemlachta leheta. Where did the Rambam get from that? Shivrei Tanur is a kli shemlachta leheta. I think from the Masechet Kelim said, it's not just me, from our brisa. That's what it sounds like in the brisa. So we said this is a tentative diuk, but it does look like in the language of the brisa that this is a real diuk. That's at least how the Rambam read the Gemara, that it's kli shemlachta leheta. So you now end up with something paradoxical. This paradox is pointed out by the pre-Megadim, so it enters into practical halacha. Pre-Megadim is a basic on the Shulchan Aruch, commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and he points us out that you can end up that through something breaking it becomes less Muktza. How can that be? I mean, the whole hachana was because the hachana continues. It's less useful than the parent. The parent was a proper keli. It had a proper use. It's an oven. The child is a shrach use. It's a weak use. It can be used to cover things. Nonetheless, that's the Problem says that's the logic that emerges from this sugya. The parent had a use. It was muchan. However, its use was constricted by being an osa use. So it was a kli melachot le'issa. It breaks. It now has a mutter use. So it becomes a kli melachot le'hatza. How can it become more muchan through breaking? Surely the whole lomdus of the Mishna is that it continues with its hachana. The answer, evidently, in this line of thinking, is that kli melachot le'issa is not less muchan than kli melachot le'hatza. That it's a keli. A keli is a keli is a keli. A keli is a slave of human need. The problem is, it's very minor, it's very quality that has a specified use means it is a slave, it's a keli. It's omed for in principle for anything, but you've wrenched it away from being omed for anything by giving it a targeted use, and that targeted use happens to be Yashan Shabbos. However, once it loses that specificity, it loses that specialization, it goes back just to being a keli. So now it's a keli that can be used for anything, and therefore you can use it for something mutter, and it reverts to being a kli melachot le'hatza. What I want to, just to summarize what we're saying, because we're I hope now deepening our understanding of Hilchos Shabbos, is we came into Hilchos Shabbos thinking a plate is not Muktza and a pen is Muktza. We then learned to understand that really a pen is not Muktza because a pen is a keli. So the Kli melachot le'issa is really actually not Muktza because it's muchan for any use. You can use it for other things. You just can't use it for its own primary use, and therefore you can't move it micham l'tel. So at that point we began thinking about a spectrum of hachana. And we put at the top of the hierarchy of the pyramid kli melachot le'hatza, which is completely muchan, and then lower down is kli melachot le'issa, which is less muchan because you can't use it. But it is omed. The answer is we misunderstood it. Kli melachot le'issa is as muchan as a kli melachot le'hatza. In some, because it's omed for any use. That's the whole lomdus of the Zerich and the Zerich Makoma. That it's your slave. It is omed for any use. The problem is its very specialization is a restrictor on it. It's not that it's less muchan. It's as muchan, and then it's repressed. It's held down. Remove the repression by breaking, and without getting super radical, it's broken out of its bonds, and now it's omed for any use, and therefore it can revert to the kli melachot le'hatza. So the Gemara isn't bothered in this reading by the conceptual idea that it being muchan, breaking makes it more muchan than its parents, and the whole lomdus of it being muchan is because it continues to be muchan like the parent. Because it's not becoming more muchan; it's as muchan as it was. It just is no longer constrained and restricted by being a kli melachot le'issa. That's the logic of it. Okay, so just to summarize, we have a brisa which says Hari kol hakelim netolim. In Shiur it's completely mutter, but we don't entirely know. But we have a Rambam that tells us that as a fact that it's completely mutter, and the logic behind it would be that evidently a kli melachot le'issa is muchan as is a kli melachot as much as a kli melachot le'hatza, and therefore it's omed for any use. Yes.
Yes, this is a secondary use for Tanur.
Yeah.
It can be a shell or
Yes. Yeah.
Is there any evidence from the Rambam anywhere that he would consider the Tanur itself as?
Yes. So we have evidence that the Rambam isn't learning this a kli melachot le'hatza. Yes. Yeah. The Rambam explicitly learns it's kli melachot le'issa. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's a good point. Thank you for adding that in. Yeah.
Sorry to tell you, but once the status of the broken piece has changed so much,
Yes.
it's now considered a new entity in terms of the cup of Kelim.
Yeah.
How does that sit with Nolad? How does it work? It's like
Because it's not a new entity. There's two chidushim in our Mishnah on the Amud earlier on Kuf Talut Amud Beis. Chiddush number one is that it's muchan, it remains with the original hachana, and chiddush number two is it's not nolad. Why is it not nolad? Because nolad is a new functionality coming into existence. Here there is no new functionality coming into existence. It's lost the functionality. But all kelim are made for anything. The whole lumdos of a kelim is it's my slave. It's made for any service I can squeeze out of it. However, I narrowed it off by specifying it for a particular specialism. Remove that narrowing off because it broke, it now remains with its original hachana. That's the very point we bring out. There is no nolad over here because nothing new is coming into existence in accordance with this svara. So that's the second point. I just want to make one more point. Does this occur even if this happens on Shabbos? Or maybe I should have thrown this back at you. Are we talking about here where it happens on Shabbos, or maybe we're talking about where it happens before Shabbos? Maybe on Shabbos itself this would be nolad, like you asked. Maybe I shouldn't have answered your question here. I should have asked the question. Where do you get from? Maybe if it happens on Shabbos, Enochanami, it would be nolad. And we're talking about where it happened before Shabbos, and therefore you have a kli that's entering into Shabbos as a shard which is useful, and therefore it has any use, and that's okay. And the answer to that is that at least in the first stage of the Gemara, that's not correct, because the Gemara wants to link it to the machlokus Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir, or to put it differently, it wants to link it to the Mishna on Kuf Chaf Daled Amud Beis, the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. And what case is that talking about? Where it's Nishma on Shabbos. That's the whole chiddush the Gemara there. It goes through the suggestion that maybe we're talking about where it broke on Erev Shabbos, and it rejects it. So we're talking about where it broke on Shabbos, and only on Shabbos, because if it broke before Shabbos, it wouldn't be muchan. Breaks on Shabbos because Chachana is determined by the beginning of Shabbos. That we saw Chachana is a chalos. It's a halachic status that's fixed and determined by the onset of Shabbos. So just joining the dots, we have a Mishnah called Chatala Dom Beis, which the Gemara says is the argument between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda is where something breaks on Shabbos, and we're not worried about nolad. But then we have a brayso over here which tells us about the din Tanur, which the Gemara says is linked to that as the same machlokas. In which case we have an explicit source that something can break on Shabbos, because as per the Mishnah, and it can superficially you can say, well, it's becoming better than its ancestor, it's achieving more functionality. And the answer is no. In removal of something that's repressing it, in removing the specialization, it now reverts back to having all functionality, because it always had all functionality, all kelim have all functionality. Harai, it was always mutar, yosorech, gufay. So again, Yotzanu B'din, we've emerged with the halacha l'maisa that at least the view of the Rambam, the Pri Megadim is masupik whether everyone holds of this or not, but the view of the Rambam is clearly established that something can break on Shabbos that was a klishim l'achta l'issa, and it can become a klishim l'achta l'heta, because it's wrong to think of a klishim l'achta l'issa less muchan than a klishim l'achta l'issa. It's as muchan, it's just held back by its specialization. The final point I just want to make in the Rambam is I printed in the sources the Rambam in source 1, the Rambam in Shabbos Kafei Halacha Yud Beis. Because the Rambam there says our Mishnah, the Mishnah of Kuf Chaf Daled Amud Beis, Kol HaKelim and Tanur Shabbos Shin Sparked are the same, etc. He brings the Mishnahs Areva and so on. He brings both our previous Mishnahs. Now, what is Tanur adding to that Mishnah? Why does the Rambam paskin Tanur? What's adding? It's true the Rambam likes cutting and pasting Gemaras and giving examples of the Gemara, but here we have a klal which supersedes this brayso. Right? The Mishnah says everything that the brayso has to say. Tanur is just another example of a klisha nishma b'Shabbos. The answer is this very chiddush that we've just said, that Tanur is another layer of chiddush. The Mishnah says that a kli that breaks on Shabbos, a kli that wasn't Muktza doesn't become Muktza by breaking on Shabbos as long as it still has functionality. We're now learning that even a kli which was quasi Muktza, because it's a Tanur and it was a kli shemlachta issa, the answer is it's not Muktza. Kli shemlachta issa is not called Muktza, and therefore if it breaks on Shabbos, the offspring is not Muktza at all, is kli shemlachta lehata. So that's a suggestion in how to piece together the Rambams, and that's a suggestion in a chiddush l'din. I will stop here just because I want next week going into proper exploration of the actual Gemara itself. What is this Tanur? What's this broken Tanur? And what's Rava suggesting in the reasoning of the Tanur? So Hashem on Tuesday, not next week, on Tuesday. That's what we'll do. I would urge everyone to work through the Cheshbon and the Gemara because I'm planning to move quite fast through this. I'm not going to go too much into the maths of Yutats and the various droshan and so on. So please put in the hard work of working through that. I just want to focus on the. You have to do it because the Gemara has to be learned, so it has to come out clear. But I just want to focus on the Muktza principles that emerge from it. So I'm just giving you notice that I'm not planning to say anything. If anyone's stuck on Peshat, I'm happy to talk about it. I'm not planning to dwell on that. I want to just basically, that's why I put dots in the source sheet. I just want to look at Rava and Rav Ashi, I'm getting myself confused. Rava, Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi. Just yeah, the two reasons of the Brisa. Yeah. Okay. I wish everyone a good day.